The Paradox Division. Written by Alan Harron. Prologue. Enforcing freedom of speech is what allows every sentient being to develop their own skills in life. If you destroy this process, then a breakdown of communication will cause a ripple effect in society. No one can prepare us for what each coming day will bring. In this rapidly changing world, it is time to take action. The families of today, the children of tomorrow, they can no longer protect themselves from the Exodus Law, a unified penal code determined by the dark shadows of power. Rigid men who show no compassion for others and let the lower food chain do the work for them. They dictate that not one person can leave their current residing position, nor can they question the rumor of disappearance in his or her community. Since each cell can only contain up to 6 inhabitants, the unexplained addition of another will result in automatic termination. No individuals can be outside of their cells after nightfall. The law clearly stresses this is for everybody's personal safety. After a recent incident involving a severe climate change, the regulations for cell departures are clearly stated throughout the site and must be upheld, with no exceptions. The logging system will also dispatch a transporter to your cell when one of your cell members has reached 35, otherwise known as the gratification. The second to last stated law regards hygiene. All supplicants must take their cleansing cases to Site E and perform their mandatory rejuvenating procedures. Any attempt to leave the site without performing this ritual will be taken severely. Lastly, it is to be reinforced that there is no connection with the pneumatic thrills to the recent disappearances. A myth started long ago of their existence, and their presence would be unspeakable for them to enter the site. And, as a personal plea from the representatives of the High Council, let it be known that safety is of the utmost importance to all, and the tireless efforts of every being is greatly appreciated. Remember, if you want peace you must prepare for war. Sincerely, Sibelius Rothschild. Chapter 1. Sibelius took great pride in seeing the building of his creation come to fruition. There were technicians at the foot of the gateway to the High Court eager to maintain the deadline. The blueprints that Sibelius had designed imposed a new way of structural refinement. The opening corridors to the ground floor were a gleaming, crisp white. Amidst the rapid shuffling of feet, Sibelius dominated the center of his unfinished masterpiece. The pillars, which maintain the foundations, stood erect like almighty chess pieces. A number of construction workers displayed the portraits of past High Court members, which lined each side of the corridor, for what seemed an eternity. The end of the mile-long, shockingly white hallway led to a spiral staircase. A wrought iron staircase suspended to the furthest regions of this tall tower loomed over any minute man. Sibelius slowly clinched the various curls and mythical designs of the staircase, and made his ascent. He often felt it something of a comfort to laboriously trudge his way upstairs. There was something unreliable and untrustworthy about sealing oneself in an elevator. Sibelius knew that his forefathers would be pleased not to rely on technology for the unnecessary. At the staircase opening to the second floor, a stern-looking man with a clipboard was anxiously waiting for Sibelius, swinging the tip of his heel and glancing to and fro. "Forgive me, Mr. Rothschild, but it is imperative that we keep to our deadline. Please, let's take a look at the progress of the termination room," said Council Member Newman. "I hope that my blueprints have been strictly adhered to. My mind is unable to breathe in this incorrigible surroundings. Nonetheless, everything appears to be progressing in cohesion with my deadline." The two High Court members pushed the doors aside, exposing the termination room. A construction member exited the room, quickly scurrying past the two regal leaders. The workers knew their place in Sibelius's society, and from the previous constitutions in the founding members' Exodus Law, they were a low form of life, as much as cell members. As you can see, the lighting is up and running. The interior is fully fitted, and as you specified in your memorandum, cleanliness will soon be of the highest quality. All the cleanser fans will be operational by the end. Sibelius raised his hand for quiet. Why aren't the elimination devices in their specific positions on the blueprints? It must be fiercely disappointing for you to waste my time on your own failure. Explain. Newman tugged at his tie hastily, and then flicked through a large manual strapped to his side. The heading read, Maintenance of High Court and Blueprints, and was stuffed with red notes and covered in scribbles. The lights flickered overhead, casting monumentally huge shadows across the room. Explain, repeated Sibelius, in a more forceful tone. Sir, it appears the elimination devices were delivered to this room. I don't know what to say. Sibelius wandered around the unfinished room, and inspected, with a more keen eye, stroking with his bare pale hands, the metallic work surfaces, and the white shelves. If the lights clearly show signs of fuse damage, and you're not doing your job properly, then we have a problem. Even one of the site scum can tell me what wire matches Earth. You no longer work here. Please leave my site. Sir, with all due respect, I don't think the law permits you to fire me. I'm certain that the devices can be spare me the pitiless excuses. Newman interrupted Sibelius. The Exodus law is one of sole right, purpose, and union. Without it my entire forefathers' labors would have achieved nothing, and they certainly would be susceptible to an incompetent employee's time to leave. An air of stressful tension crept into the room, and Newman kept his eyes to the white tiles. He placed the manual to his waist, and strode to the door without a second glance. Sibelius continued to observe his newly built surroundings, undeterred by the lack of competence. A heavy exhale from Rothschild seemed to gravitate towards him, new fresh sounds and new noises. He altered his still state to the window, and peered from above to the grounds below. At the High Court entrance, a herd of workers gestured to a stocky man parking a behemoth black truck. This would explain the preemptive new noise, and Sibelius's sudden heightened feeling of satisfaction. The workers rushed from the attention of the truck, like a deer in headlights, and could be heard echoing throughout the white main hall. Mr. Rothschild, sir, forgive me for addressing you, but, yes, I'll be right there. From the elimination floor, the 15-minute walk through every room brought its own surprises. A confirmation form needed to be signed on certain luxuries, or arrangements for further meetings regarding transport. Each room held its own set of workers, carrying out their own assigned procedure. After exiting an unlit storage room on Site B, Sibelius was approached by his other colleagues of the council. A sort of depot, with damp concrete walls and pieces of scattered mortar littering the ground. Behind Sibelius's colleagues vested the black truck, which never left his amorous stare. The future and forthcoming centerpiece to the site lay dormant in Sibelius's wake only a few feet away. Hello, Carter, Sinclair, Zanzibar. All the worker evaluations are complete, I trust. Every employee is currently returning their tools and leaving the site, said Carter. You need not worry, Rothschild, we will be up and running on time. Zanzibar was a well-turned-out, elderly gentleman, who was a good friend of Rothschild, something of an astute confidant to all Rothschild's struggles up to this point. Although Zanzibar was very supportive of Rothschild, he would never take the place of his doting father. Unfortunately, sir, we do have some rather unpleasant news that will need to be taken care of at once. Earlier today, a mass outbreak of accusations arose near the East Cell Zone regarding the so-called pneumatic thrills. It's all quite preposterous, of course, but with your workers nearby we managed to detain the situation. And Carter, have these inferior outspoken drones been sent? The recently completed Judgment Detainee Center, said Carter. I'll focus my attention on that later. Now, allow us to prepare the centerpiece for what I hope to be the High Court's greatest accomplishment. The colleagues in Rothschild turned their attention to the Titanic truck. The stocky driver heaved the door open and handed a wad of forms to Carter to be signed. From the open hangar, glittering shafts of light bounced off the concrete walls from a hanging orange sun. After signing, the stocky worker proceeded to the truck, flipped a switch on the side, and walked out the hangar to the sun-drenched site. The truck doors were down, exposing two dark, green boxes, equal to the stature of a refrigerator. "Gentlemen, I need your sworn reassurance that this matter stays with us." "Agreed." The colleagues nodded sternly to Rothschild, in a solemn, somewhat traditional row of closure. "And the driver is of no concern," said Zanzibar, holding up one of the contracts. "He's just signed away not only the precious cargo, but also his life. Quickly, we need them at Site A for sterilization, Site G for any maintenance and checking of their condition, and finally to the Quadrant, where they'll remain until the unveiling." All the time discussing these procedures, the three colleagues had already unloaded the truck, personally heaved it onto a forklift, and were taking them across the site. It may have been due to Rothschild's enclosed anticipation, but in the setting sun, the boxes appeared to be glowing lighter green, and the sunlight intensified. But Rothschild mistook this for lack of sleep, and he marched in the opposite direction, to his office. The theory of someone taking their work home with them is lost on Sibelius. A cold, hard mattress and file of papers were what occupied Sibelius's office. Anything else to Sibelius was considered clutter, and shredded for confidential purposes, or taken on board as one of his colleagues' priority. By this time, the cell operators were all in a state of rest, and in 2 days their hard work would begin. All of Sibelius's colleagues would also be asleep, except he himself never knew the guilty uneventful experience of sleeping. A special blend of muscle and nerve-calming steroids and chemicals gave Sibelius his full alert throughout each day. A man never can reach his full potential in one lifetime. The slogan rested in a frame above Sibelius's bed, a constant reminder to persevere and overcome all obstacles, let himself become like no other. Lazarus Rothschild, his father, always told him to be his own person, to strive to do something different, make an impact on the world, and the world will make an impact on you. He had no mementos of his father, only a torn photograph, depicting his younger self, and then a hand, possibly his father, on his shoulder. Atop his pedestal at his desk, Sibelius could witness his own world in the making from his office window. The ballpoint moved at an incredulous speed, sanctioning the execution of today's East Cell troublemakers. There was no place here for troublemakers, and one so raucous could certainly not stand to perform upcoming duties. The test subjects would almost be fully prepared. To think that the green casing held the entire future in the balance, and no one, not even the pneumatic thrills, were going to stand in my way. Chapter 2. Once the ownership forms were finally completed for Sibelius's green cases, he proceeded to the iron staircase for an overview of what the workers had been doing with their time. The path to and from distant locales in the High Court were slowly building up in Rothschild's mind like a jigsaw. He knew the paths in bits, as though his feet found ways to make mindful where to go. No security at present left Rothschild very vulnerable to the elements, and the only signs of protection were fully fitted smoke alarms. The time now peaked at 5 a.m., although in this placid environment it was difficult to distinguish. Common now everything is perpendicular to their seats, work efficiently cannot fail, Sibelius recited to himself. At such a gentle pace it felt like a regular sermon. After passing the marble columns, Rothschild removed from his pocket a white surgical glove, pulled it over his nimble fingers, and jerked the large atrium doors open with considerable force. The newly fitted oak doors brought with them their first heaving, creaking sounds, and a festoon of leaves swished through the doors onto the marble floor. A full snow scattered the tiles with palettes of greens, golds, browns and fiery orange. Sibelius crouched towards the scattered multicolored mulch, and for the first time today, a tiny smile swept his face. He enjoyed dead leaves, not because they symbolized decay, rather their vision of dark color embodied a full leaf for a leaf, but after seeing a mix of young green leaves, Sibelius got up and moved back to the oaken doors. Waiting outside in an orderly queue were 5 well-dressed young men. They each seemed like they'd been standing there for hours, anxious for Sibelius's somewhat relaxed debriefing. The volunteer security guards tried not to buckle under their own weight and keep to Sibelius's standards. "Let me make this brief," announced Sibelius. "I don't care for your names, you are but a code in my logging book. All I expect from you is to carry out your daily procedures and don't talk. You take the Exodus line to mind, keep your nose clean, and do whatever me or the council members request." "Understood." 3 of the guards responded in a sort of militia-style nod, kept focus and saluted. But the other 2 guards were a little more furtive after this command, and slowly shook their heads in unison. "Comma, set you to your task, that is all." The new recruits marched past Sibelius to the inner sanctum of the High Court, while he remained in the same stance and breathed heavily. Sibelius crouched down to the sandy, weather-beaten floor, and collected a handful of brown sand in his gloved palm. "I hope you're with me on this, Father," Sibelius muttered, as the sand sifted through his fingers, and was suddenly caught in a powerful draft, and blew vicariously east towards the cell zone. A place of solitude and restraint. That's the best way to sum up the cell zone. At night the lanes were desolate, as though a silent film and a ghost town perished into one. The thousands of cells were in complete silence. You wouldn't imagine that people, human beings, were living in each one, but then the Exodus law forbid it. At daytime, when the sun was at its highest, the zone flourished. For what appeared to be Mother Nature sprinkling life seeds, it awoke for that little moment. All cell members would eat and report to Site E, but the water was rationed, and if you didn't arrive fast enough to cleanse yourself, then you were labeled a scum, and dismissed to what can only be described as solitary confinement. They would sit you in a dimly lit square room, with a piece of chalk to write apologies. But to further humiliate you, and to realize the severity of what you'd done, a guard would bring plates of rotting meat into your cell every hour. Outside in the lanes, the streets had blue grass, dark yellow paving, and a large digital clock, which rested atop the doorway to all the sites. Below the clock, a large notice board rested against perspex glass. If in the space of the early hour, everyone managed to cleanse, eat, sterilize their cells, and complete a series of daily psychological tests, then the notice board would be the next thing before work. The board usually displayed cell members who were reaching their gratification age, cell members' names who had broken the Exodus law, displayed in the center. But more importantly, the clock was counting down the grand opening of the High Court. For the remaining 19 hours until the first cogs sputtered into motion, all 6,079 cell members, of all ages, were inducted through a database, which verified their workstation and cell number. At this precise moment, when a non-entity of the cell community was experiencing their annual psychological analysis, Court member Carter checked the functions for the new workstations. The vast, warehouse-like domain opened onto a sweeping array of conveyor belts, leading to a large expansive grate. A set of unopened cardboard boxes adorned either side, and each cast its own harsh, prominent shadow from harsh glowing switches and dials. "And you're certain that all safety tools have been accounted for, because a red marker slashes all that separates right from wrong?" Carter spoke, in a rapid tone to a startled site worker. "Why yes, Mr. Carter. All of the blue blueprints were checked over thoroughly. Oh, and the elimination devices are on the next level now, if you'd care to check." No, I trust you." Evasively scanning his portfolio, Carter moved to the other side of Site C's workstation. "Go and inform one of the new security men to switch on the upper floor generator, and bring me some hot coffee. Don't touch the walls on your way out." As the meager employee scuffled out of the room, a momentary flicker of shadow coveted the station. Possibly from the generator, but it usually doesn't interfere with the downstairs mechanics. Before returning his gaze to the portfolio, Carter was distracted by the sound of heavy brushing from the grate, something of a melee of compressed debris, and with unknown force, A bustle of leaves blew out from behind the grate, stunning Carter and instinctively making the portfolio a protective shield. "What are these doing here?" muttered Carter. "I don't like it." Rothschild will want to know. But lingering in Carter's mind, what plagues his thoughts until he clambered into bed, would be the cause of the leaves moving freely. No windows, open doors, or exhaust fans could have caused the disturbance. "Here's your coffee, Mr. Carter, and the power is working completely. I do apologize if there was any inconvenience. I'll go now." This air of unease hadn't gone unnoticed. Unexplained phenomena were beginning to emerge. For instance, the power supply suffering multiple shutdowns, and feeling unexplained sensations of sweltering heat and pangs of cold in certain walkways, especially near the quadrant, the only private denizen of this entire site with restriction, limited only to the unwitting eyes of Rothschild and Zanzibar. This exception infuriated both Carter and Sinclair, and left an air of hostility between them and Zanzibar. Although they respected and admired their fellow High Court member Rothschild, they were at an unease towards Zanzibar's intentions. A man of belief in the common good and less provincial equality. In other words, relying on the basics and awareness of everything. After walking out of the narrowed hallway of the warehouse, Carter turned the corner and bumped into Sinclair. "Pardon me, Carter, I was coming here to find you. There is a meeting taking place in 20 minutes. Sinclair nodded, while at the same time, collecting some of Carter's drop forms. "Sinclair, it may be slightly untoward, but have you noticed in strange occurrences?" "My goodness, man, don't talk such drivel. From the looks of things you're working too much." "What do you mean occurrences? Is this about the pneumatic thrills?" Immediately after uttering these words of a most unexpected response, Sinclair pushed Carter to the concrete wall and covered his mouth over the disrupted theory. My friend, you have been working yourself too hard of late. The speculation regarding the green cases, 12 hours before the grand opening in Rothschild has been pushing you to the limit." "You're right, I just remembered." "I have no reassured Sinclair. There is no remembering, just trailing the instincts of others. I finished my duties, so I'll continue with what you have left." He placed a small silver key into his palm. "And I'll speak with you later about final preparations. I can handle Rothschild, so I'll cover for you. Now go." Carter darted his eyes back at Sinclair, who was already turning the corner with a handful of manuals. Maybe he was pushing himself to the limit. Work was so demanding, but Sinclair knew what benefits the High Court would bring in later life. An equal position to that of Rothschild, and no financial concerns, business or otherwise. Carter gripped the key in his palm, and proceeded to the stairwell, which led to the ground floor. A peeling presentation of new bore into his mind every passing hour. Lights were complete, and now a neutral decorum was pushing its way in. Furniture, and a large oak bookcase greeted him when he entered the ground floor atrium. Once again the mammoth pillars dominated the ground floor. Carter strode over to a small, dark cupboard next to the bookcase, inserted the key and removed a pair of glasses and a bottle of tablets. Closing the cupboard door, he swerved around and headed for the door. The chamber of the quadrant pulsated an eerie green color, which blanketed the entire room. When Mr. Rothschild entered, he flicked on a light switch that disturbed a layer of dust, and silently proceeded to the center of the room. Bathed in the glow of the menagerie of stars stood the very same glowing cargo. "Let me count the way you will change my life," muttered Rothschild. Maybe it was the heavenly moment of an infinitesimal number of clouds, but the atmosphere in the quadrant shifted. The incandescent green of the cargo shifted shades in conjunction with the glowing stars beaming through an open grate. Rothschild dropped his limpid eyes to the floor, as though this spectacle were of little or no interest to him. He approached the green cargo and up a short flight of stairs, and removed from his pocket a ballpoint pen, and gently tapped the side of the left cargo hold. Tap, 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 each followed with a harmonious yet dull echo, like the muffling cries of a trapped elk. The other cargo hold reciprocated these effects, which made Rothschild seize this behavior. You should respect me for taking time out for a one-on-one intervention. Not even Zanzibar could imagine what your custom-made beauty will bring at the imminent grand opening of the High Court. Chapter 3. A turmoil of incessant feet shuffling and stopping of forms plagues the entire site locale. Just over 3 hours before work began, and the cell zone inhabitants would be put to the test. Their everyday life until gratification would involve sterilizing and constructing weaponry, monitoring the possibility of serve climate changes, and building further, classified areas to the site, just like the other workers. But, what's this about weaponry, I hear you ponder? For a time, long since the founding days of the High Court, an air of corruption and stale, false testimony lingered on the events of its forefathers. At the time of the First Amendment to the Exodus Law, all governing bodies, including one Lazarus Rothschild, were attempting to disband any use of firearms or other man-made artillery deemed lethal to any gifted bodies. However, not all assigned to the destruction of what may be humanity's only solid defense. Even with their sharp minds intact, and a wealth of knowledge, or human alternatives, it was not meant to be. The governing bodies chose to outweigh the possibilities of no forceful self-defense against staring down the end of a shotgun. Despite Lazarus's best attempts to distill this nonsense, the Exodus Law kept the prospect that all High Court members must carry a firearm at all times. This newly formed apathy was intended by all 17 High Court members to remain out of public knowledge, for if the people knew that they themselves wouldn't be allowed the same treatment, the consequences would be dire. Not every entity could be allowed a weapon. The terrifying consequences of what come with owning a gun could result in a High Court member's murder. No, a parasite of the earth cannot be entrusted with such power. The majority of the High Court did not look kindly on Rothschild Sr.'s way of thinking. Every other Exodus Law applied for and voted by the members was received with great aplomb. But, with this lingering of hesitation and concern of the firearms, the High Court suspended Rothschild and his friend Zanzibar, who until now was new to the High Court forum, and never experienced a world of such pride and decadence. The cogs of deception were put into motion. The 15 remaining High Court members, or shall we say, the dark shadows of power, completed their Exodus Law on a mutual basis. Throughout his lifetime, the suspension was never lifted, but Rothschild still held many of the responsibilities of being a High Court member. Apart from anything involving the Exodus Law, you weren't educated into the High Court, you needed to be born into it, and Rothschild's dependencies on High Court matters only deflated after the birth of his son Sibelius. How did it come to be that Sibelius became a lucrative member of the High Court after his father's wavering concern? But more importantly, why would Sibelius welcome the development of guns? An inscrutable number of security guards divided the parallel between the cell zone and the sites and beyond. The alert, yet doused with meandering stares of each human were felt in the airwaves. If one were to shuffle their feet, blink an eyelid, or an unexpected breeze catch a blade of grass, you could feel it, because everyone is so alert. State in sequence your age, gender, code, surname and workstation, or the choice spoken words to all new worker inductees. Of course, they all witnessed the notoriety and informal speech of Rothschild, just 55 minutes before the opening. 23, female, 2049, Leeson and workstation C, she said dryly. The stern-faced guard handed the cell member a pair of dark boots and a slip of paper. She then passed the divide, without hesitation, and proceeded with the mulled procession of the others to the courtyard of the High Court. But in that fateful instant, it wasn't the impending nature of graft that brought her to a halt, but the unexplained of nature itself. If it were not a dream, it was surely heaven's misguided blueprints. Why did effervescent green leaves flourish underfoot and decrepit brown still cling to the branches of youth? In the sanctum of Sibelius Rothschild's office, the man himself was putting on a black tie, while Zanzibar stood in the doorway, reading through today's proceedings. From this place, you could hear the low beating of crowds nearing the site. Instead of a mirror, Sibelius used the reflection of the glass, holding his only keepsake. So, we have the green casing, currently at the opening of the High Court. Security personnel are on standby, of course, and the upcoming workers will be sanctioned at a distance. Any unfortunate incidents that I should know about, Zanzibar. Upon finally rectifying his presentation, ruffling his hair and glancing out to the throng of people, Zanzibar was dutifully rewarded his full attention. "Let me take a look." The figure of Sinclair peered around the doorway and caught the eye of an impatient Sibelius. "Sir, the crowd of inevitable workers have gathered. Should we keep them waiting a little longer?" No, I am quite prepared for their leering eyes to witness such beauty. Inform Carter and the other members, I'll be there shortly." Sinclair darted out of the room, his speedy departure reflected from the heavy padding on the new carpet. Yes, here it is. A minor climate incident in cell number 222, and a power cut on site A. Other than that, however, Sibelius was already vacant from the room, and Zanzibar was rather perplexed at this sudden disappearing act. On the contrary, at the time of Rothschild's design process to the new High Court, he failed to include a hidden feature of his own importance. He departed his office via a false wall panel, which opened into an extremely narrow, winding corridor. Not even Zanzibar was familiar with this hidden attribute, but Sinclair considered that someone of such regalia and posterity should have some form of sanctuary, in case of any unfortunate mishap, climate or the pneumatic thrills. This would help in his darkest hour. Sibelius made a frequent turn through the narrow denizen, with only a flickering candle in his white-gloved palm. At the last turn, the corridor opened into a small box-like room, rather like a bunker. He grasped the dangling light cord, without even looking, and filled the room with luminescence. Inside the small room, there was an old mahogany chair facing a rather downtrodden executive desk, and an array of blank screens. Despite Sinclair's reservations of new technology, along with his father and forefathers, there would be no primitive alternative to obtain such a wondrous overlooking. The system was installed at a very early period, a time when cell inhabitants were being culled for mediocrity, and building up to the rank of worker. Sibelius needed to have the man kitted who helped him create this room. He informed Zanzibar that the worker showed incompetence, and for that, Zanzibar silenced him. Sibelius touched each of the 8 screens with his gloved hand, and they instantly flickered into focus various locales on site. Many were programmed to the cell zone, 1 or 2 in the High Court main entrance, which features Sinclair, Carter and Zanzibar, all irritably glancing up and down the hallway in their watches. From what Sibelius's static view permitted him, closer to the entrance stood the testing inspector, Mr. Greaves, one of the officials who checked and monitored climate conditions, Dr. Jeremiah, and Zanzibar's younger sister Penny, whom Sibelius greatly admired. Her polite conversation, regarding her background as a horticulturalist and system analyst, met with admiration. After spending several minutes surveying the monitors, Sibelius touched the screens with his palm, pulled the cord and proceeded back through the narrow stone-built corridor. Sibelius felt a cold chill and stood motionless in his tracks. This sudden temperature startled him, and he swerved in astonishment, almost dropping the lit candle. "What price will he pay?" were the shrill, yet harmonious words that echoed through the glowing corridor. The voice sounded female, yet Sibelius could see no one, and this secret passage was unknown to anyone. The cool air blew through his hair and Sibelius began to quickly pace towards the entrance. The destruction will be his own seemed to utter close to his chest, and for the first time, Sibelius felt scared. He increased the pace to a run and burned his hand with the candle and dropped it. Sibelius was running blind against some unforeseeable demon and his pulse began to race. The cool air blew forcefully against his skin, as he pushed forward against the torrent. Sibelius was blown back to the ground, and hurt his head on the icy floor with a thud. He felt trapped in his own creation, and only when he gripped the wall to prevent the paranormal breeze and voice endangering him did it stop. An unexpected glimmer of light, natural sunlight, seeped through the gap behind the bookcase. "God is waiting for his children," were the last chilling words Sibelius heard when he sealed the entrance. Deep in his thoughts, calculating what may have caused this, the scattered thoughts of this tyrant switched his appearance. Markings of black checkered his once white shirt, and the perfectly brushed hair now seemed matted and unkempt. What would the rest of the High Council say to this, whispered Sibelius in an uncertain tone. They shall not know of what transpired here. Besides, they know not of my private denizen, and if such nonsense got out, Sibelius, are you ready yet? The crowd are becoming impatient. And Penny, my goodness, what happened to you? If you don't mind me saying, you don't seem your usual self. What happened to your clothes? It's nothing, Zanzibar, I'm quite fine. I became a little preoccupied in my paperwork and spilled some ink. Forget my clothes, let's get this over with. Without any further contemplation, Sibelius and Zanzibar made their way to the baying crowd. From their sliding feet against the metallic spiral staircase, Zanzibar and Sibelius witnessed a clear view of the oak doors and the High Court members, now 5 minutes from the grand opening. The entire majesty of the High Court, the cells, the sights, everywhere, complete. A rarity bestowed by Sibelius once he simultaneously walked to the podium, and his eyes glazed over from the portraits of High Court founders crept in a faint smile. His unusual encounter still lingered in the back of his mind, like a flame unable to be doused in a torrent of rain. He approached the backs of whom he's witnessed from the monitors, who were deep in conversation. "Hello, Mr. Rothschild, pleased to meet you. Now, everything appears to be in conjunction with the minimum standards required. All the delivered tactical forms and information is fully complete, although, one or two things did strike me as quite perplexing." "And what might that be, Mr. Greaves?" At that moment, while Greaves pulled some enclosed forms from a briefcase, the occupied huddle greeted and exchanged welcomes with Sibelius. "You must be enthralled in all this pandemonium, Sibelius. My brother informs me you've been working yourself to exasperation." Sibelius nodded politely, and gave out some rather half-hearted comments of satisfaction. Greaves then approached and continued with the evaluation. "So, yes, the blueprints. Now I've conducted a search of the premises, and I'm well aware that some rooms are off limits. But there was an incredulous power surge in one of the loading bay rooms, on Site J. Greaves, with such a vast project weighing on my shoulders, this is the least of my concerns. Power surges happen frequently, but I can assure you that by tomorrow, the first full operational day, it will be a thing of the past." Rothschild was conducting himself rather resolutely under the circumstances. Any man who'd witnessed a torturing spectacle would speak out or cry freedom. Sibelius Rothschild is unfamiliar with any of these, need I remind? And with a final sigh of contemplation, Rothschild stood alongside his comrades and held the oak doors open. The crowd were alert, the speech was nestled by his side, and the grand opening had finally arrived. Chapter 4. An expanse of dull, cloaked figures and pale faces stared back at the elite group of High Court officials. A carpeted red stage was specially displayed before the oak doors. The real centerpiece which had everyone fixated was the green cases. His fellow colleagues shook hands with Sibelius, and, in his imposing distraction, Sibelius approached the podium, speech in hand. A cool breeze blew through the courtyard of the site, collecting an array of colorful leaves in the accumulating air. Presiding in a somewhat enigmatic position atop the stage, Sibelius darted his steely vision across the site. This was the first instance he'd seen the final result with fresh eyes, alongside his colleagues and creatures, both present and future. The crowd of cell inhabitants were unsure where to look, some following where Sibelius looked, and others with eyes to the floor, out of respect and lack of curiosity. Sibelius took one final look at the green cases, with a somewhat suspicious glare, and Zanzibar called silence before Sibelius began. The tireless efforts of the men you see before you will not go unrewarded. Even those of you before me, if you possess an insurmountable drive for success and hard work and determination, you have my respect. The next 10 months, I won't lie to you, will develop a hefty sum of responsibility. This site and this courtyard that bear witness before your presence are merely the building blocks of a future monumental landmark. From the notice boards and psychological and analytical tests you've all participated in, today's work is doubtless all too familiar. The tests were merely a premature stimulant for basic manual labor, the more insightful details of which will be privately informed to you by Mr. Zanzibar, whom will speak with you later, also providing each of you with uniformed attire. Then you'll start work at the specified zone. This new wave of change also introduces a somewhat radical inclusion upon all our lives. After lengthy discussions with formal council members and the leader of the site parole board, Xavier Marcellus, we have agreed on a new amendment to the Exodus Law. Full attention is necessary, everyone. Full attention. Thank you. The first of 9 new amended laws by the council states that all cell members must obey the orders of all council members. Under no circumstances will refusal be tolerated. The second of 9 new amended laws by the council states that every inhabitant must sterilize and cleanse themselves as frequently as possible upon the minimum of every 3 hours. I consider this the golden rule of my law book. The third of 9 new amended laws by the council states the existence of the nomadic thrills to be fictitious, and any such mentioning or speculation of their existence will result in a premature gratification. The fourth of the 9 new amended laws by the council regards the association of weaponry. I trust you are all familiar with the workings of a firearm, and that for the safety and well-being of everyone, a number of guards, myself included, will be armed. We are all aware that in the past week an outbreak of suicides and attempted murders occurred in the west of the cell zone. To prevent any repeat performances, I'm sure we are all in an understanding when it comes to safety. The fifth of the 9 new amended laws by the council regards a track and counter device. Everyone is supplied with a collar to wear, which will keep check and limit the level of words uttered on a regular basis and to remain familiar with everyone's movements. The sixth of the 9 new laws amended by the council regards the presence of nature. For our way of life, plants and trees would be in constant resource, although the numbers will be reduced in order to accommodate building work. Also, any consumption thought to be able to harbor life-giving seeds will be eradicated from all foodstuffs. If this premature moment weren't etched in stone, then Sibelius's next predominant output would have surely stunned the onlookers. A howling rush of icy air raged through the courtyard, which brought a flurry of dark leaves and caused numerous cell members to be pushed to the gravel ground. Rothschild's entourage looked on with discomfort, apart from Zanzibar, who appeared to be registered in some form of meditation. The crowd were now dispelling and all was made clear. Another assault on the climate appeared to force many of the leaves onto the green cases. Mr. Rothschild, it appears the fates have transpired against us. Allow the guards to return the cell members back and we shall reconvene at another. Mr. Greaves, I have the situation in hand. My site shall not become victim to this unexpected onslaught. As the unsettling breeze continued to rise and fall, the guards collaborated their efforts and expertise, and ushered the cell members towards their eternal resting places. Sibelius sharply retorted to the green casing on the left, and the somewhat magnetic pull of leaves didn't appear to stun him at all. Some mystical, unenviable force appeared to hold the others back, who looked on at Sibelius with a waning anxiety. Greaves was already struggling through the oak doors. The whites of his eyes seemed to glow in that fleshy skull of his. Dr. Jeremiah struggled thereafter, and needed to grasp the handle firmly to avoid falling to the floor. Sibelius, what are you doing? Hollered Penny over the sound of the wind. The cases are in a firm place. Quickly join us before they arrive. By this time, Penny and Zanzibar stood as vertically as possible against the elements, and both held out their gloved palms in a last-ditch attempt before saving themselves. He placed a bare hand over the leaves covering the casing, and the touch was of an unfamiliar sensation. "What will you do?" an ominous voice cried out, from an unidentifiable source. He felt the weight of his body lift. However, the elements were not the cause. A lifesaver this man is. Through the distractions of mysticism, his inner soul lost contact with the rest of the world. Zanzibar had heaved Sibelius from his position, with all the strength an 81-year-old man has, and thrust the body into the High Court foyer. Falling recklessly to the ground, Penny landed alongside them both, when a powerful oak tree ripped from its foundations, and crashed against the impenetrable doors, in a sea of splinters. The noise was like the sound barrier being torn anew, and the other officials dragged the tireless trio to the end of the hallway. Lulling in and out of conscious, Sibelius glanced at a large, deep crack in the doors. Retiring to the sanctity of a lone boardroom, the seven gathered their crippled and distraught thoughts. From this bleak, yet well-protected denizen, they were all still audibly immersed in the recent chaos. The deafening shatter of branches and a calamity of assorted paraphernalia swept past the windows. Huddled in silence, and with Penny dispensing heated beverages to her allies, Dr. Jeremiah was the first to speak. I'm sure you all have an immeasurable set of questions you'd like to." "Indeed we do," interrupted Carter. "Like what the hell you think you're doing, allowing the speech to proceed, when you knew full well all of our lives were at risk?" Carter stood at this point, and irrationally kicked the table in protest and clenched his fists. "Carter, let me be blunt. The climate tests I carried out indicated the pressure would remain irrefutably docile for a number of hours. This shocking display, brought about by Mother Nature, is equally shocking to me, as it is to you. Oh, please, take a seat, you sanctimonious retard. In 16 years of working for the High Council, never have I seen such a blatant error in administration. I mean, Sibelius could have been killed, were it not for the heroic actions of Zanzibar over here. Gentlemen, please, we are all friends here," spoke Greaves in a somewhat exasperated tone of voice. "Allow our minds to clear, and once the storm has subsided, the cell members will be recalled to continue the speech, and then, the matter of this climate administration will be resolved." "Greaves is right," said Penny. "Everyone needs to rest. We've all endured a traumatic experience. The climate, you fools, has no part in this tawdry affair," muttered Sibelius, rising from an armchair, still in a daze. Greater forces are at work, and reflecting the crowd, Sibelius had the attention of everyone. "Today's atmospheric is no god's play. I had no intention of telling you this, but before the speech, in my office, I witnessed a spectacle of a paranormal nature. Voices leaked through the walls, like stolen memories in a bottle lost at sea. I know of the speculation you all utter, each of you, in darkened corners. Fear not, for these thoughts are shared, and not to be feared. I tampered with Dr. Jeremiah's climate report." Sibelius took this revelation as an opportunity to take a breath and await the response. With no one daring to oppose Rothschild's declaration, he continued, "I wanted to be tested. Like all noblemen, like my father, when a suspected threat tears up the dust, you want to know how far your strength will go." Sibelius approached the reverberating window, and flicked the blinds upwards to see the podium being carried into the marauding trees. He looked down at the unmentioned 3 Exodus laws, and stuffed them into his pocket. "The green cases, what have I told you of them?" Sinclair stood, and said, "Sibelius, from what I know, they are blocks of a rare substance, Facinthus, extracted from the cliffs, on the outskirts of the forest, which you told me would be carved into the images of your parents, and remain eternal outside the doors of the High Court, and would remain, unspoiled, for many centuries. Evidently, you have no picture of your mother, and the image of your father is damaged. That's what I'll let you to believe." Sibelius returned to his armchair, and turned his back to the group. "Have any of you ever read the Bible?" Chapter 5. The cacophony of raging sound diluted among the trees and nature. A revelation exposed from Sibelius has left the officials in disarray. A pallid glow from a crestfallen sun leaves their residing sanctuary as cold as spoken words. I have read the Bible, Sibelius, however I don't see what its relevance is, said Penny, pressing the creases out of her skirt. Well, those of us present who waver an inkling towards interest in the holy book may like to remain seated. Sibelius reared his head to the desk of confused pagans, and Mr. Greaves and Carter left the room. Atil in the Old Testament depicts the creation of two beauties in God's own image, inhabiting a land of splendor and freedom. Only temptation led them, driving the humans to banishment. Adam and Eve. The officials and guests looked on with bemusement, although Sibelius still had a closing statement. The fact of the matter is you do not have all the answers. Sibelius's mind filled with this translucent voice as if from nowhere, and he darted his eyes frantically across the shallow denizen. Who spoke just then? Who interrupted me? The panel glanced around the table, and equally agreed that not one of them interrupted Sibelius. These frequent occurrences were now visually affecting Sibelius. As he loosened his tie, the facade he built up was now fading, and told the panel he was restless, and would continue the discussion after a coffee break. At that moment, sunbeams flitted through the shutters. A both confused and drained group shuffled to the lobby, passing alongside the two unholy ones, Carter and Greaves. The witnessing of this exit disrupted their deep talk, and they adjourned with the others, and under the intense glare of Zanzibar, both he and Sibelius assessed the naturalistic carnage of the entrance. I know something's troubling you. If you hold back what's disturbing you, you're only hurting yourself. They already hold their suspicions. Secrets only help protect the ones you love, and you know by all accounts my conscience is but, what's all this nonsense about the Bible? Do you think God is punishing you? I know full well God favors those deserving, and no one is more deserving than you, Sibelius. So, are you going to tell me what the connection is? The fate of Rothschild's expose rested squarely on this comment. He looked from the flanking of a highly raised desk, out onto a dreary and solemn sky. What's that outside? From a clear vantage point of obliterating the previous questions, Sibelius left Zanzibar hanging on and approached the dilapidated foray. Muscling an incomparable level of strength, Zanzibar helped Sibelius push aside the door, creating a shock wave to the other door which collapsed on its side with a crash. A number of guards were scheduled to monitor the entrance, though the pallid horizon showed no signs of life, regardless of the species. The wrinkled eyes and glittering ones of fledgling youth scanned the damage, like curses on a chalkboard. A pile of young saplings and mounds of earth scuppered together. The podium was nestled in a tall redwood, and small fires and burnt ashen fed on the gravel ground. Strangely, in place of the green cases appeared a solid block of dark leaves, wrapping their once translucent aura into an entirely disheveled one. How is it attracting the leaves like that? Said Zanzibar. Is that what you saw, Sibelius? Do you honestly think this is the work of God? I heard something, Zanzibar. An ominous voice I cannot explain. A clear alluring tone, a heavenly female voice, who spoke so sensually it only seemed natural they would be deserving of better words. It said, you do not have all the answers, and, I take it, this is the first and only time you've encountered this voice. Yes, lied Sibelius. I know what you would do, my friend, and I too shall follow suit. Continue. Regardless of this paranormal comment, I will strive to better myself. If I don't have all the answers, then it's here. It's in the walls. It's in the foundations of this infrastructure. Clearly, there is something I have yet to accomplish. But I don't need to look for the answers. They'll come to me. The dark yellow paving of the cell zone were a swath of miscellaneous cell inhabitants, foreboding after the recent storm. All the officers and guards were on watch, and the chief in command deemed it necessary to keep each cell member confined, to avoid an escape or climate-related incident. Whilst the guard in charge spoke to Sinclair on behalf of his fellow officers and their neglect, over the phone, a young cell member called Leeson, and many more reflections in the dome glass looked on at the carnage. She developed no voice and her equals were also silent. After many years in isolation, and growing up in such an awkward environment, they knew no form of communication. To them a guard's instructions were difficult to comprehend, though phonetically based terms in their psychological exams gave them an aptitude for reading. Leeson was a fighter. When inducted into the High Court cell zone at 6 years old, she pushed a fellow detainee, causing a mass calamity, and giving her time to explore behind the scenes of her new home from home. All the inhabitants shared an understanding with one another, although under the scrutiny of the guards, friendships never merged. Each passing day who knew how many inhabitants would be browsing the parameters, what with gratifications and escape attempts. 2049, return to the courtyard, quickly, there's a gap in the line, protested one of the guards. Leeson turned back to her reflection, only to be blocked by a number of cell inhabitants on the other side of the glass, and in fast-fading breath, was the smeared word plan. Forgive me for speaking out of turn, Mr. Sinclair. You should be uttering forgiveness for speaking at all. You know the rules, Jones. Number 1004 inches, protested Sinclair, who circled a delinquent cell member, the termination room glistening in artificial light, forcing the cell member to shield his eyes. Take this pen, and inscribe your sins upon the paper before I really lose my temper. At that moment Zanzibar entered the room, deathly quiet, and narrowing dart-like eyes of a hawk. This won't take long, I trust. Sibelius is ready to start again, said Zanzibar over the victim's whimpering. Let me have a look, and Zanzibar's furtive glare surveyed the writing. You've not even reached your gratification, Jones, and already you've made quite a name for yourself. So tell me, why did you try to overpower a guard? Jones shifted in his chair, and made no effort to write or speak a response. I am entitling you permission to speak, commanded Zanzibar. They both glared at the miscreant cell member, who merely pressed his head to the desk and grasped the pen in his palm. A man doesn't deserve this injustice. Just let me die. Sibelius looked over at Zanzibar with a somewhat reluctant glance. He nodded solemnly and Zanzibar walked towards the entrance. Before exiting, Zanzibar pulled, with some difficulty, a lever. A red glowing bulb flashed on either side of the room. As he passed Sibelius, a dark black object, resembling a dart gun. See you in 10 minutes. Once the door closed, the room glowed incessantly from the red bulbs, and Sinclair loomed over the victim with a glazed expression. Jones stayed in this dreamlike position, from the moment Sinclair rested the object against his neck. When the lights began to flicker, and smoke emanated from the gaps in the stone wall, and Sinclair's hand shook ferociously from the object's unwavering force, then it died. The cell member and the apocalypse-themed light and smoke that had enveloped the stream-like denizen. The pen dropping out of Jones' hand to the ground amplified in the room, and in a nonchalant, almost calming mode, Sinclair swiftly tore the ID number from Jones's shoulder, placed it in his pocket, and left the room. An upheaval embodied the whole ground floors of the hallway. 12 guards lifted with incomparable strength the damaged oak door, while some disheveled cell members were put to use removing the podium from a limpet tree. Huddled in a corner near the entrance, Sibelius scanned the cover of his newly copied speech, and Carter called instructions to the guards. Sibelius, I escorted Penny. She said she's sorry about what happened, and that the situation's left her quite shaken up, and she's not the only one. Zanzibar, I know everything will be fine. Let us accomplish what's left of my speech, and I can relate back to what matters. Sibelius sat with narrowed eyes flaring at Zanzibar, the glimmer in his eye replaced with a somewhat elusive wisdom. He arose from the padded chair, and approached the replaced door, which was still having its hinges fixed by some exasperated guards. Carter compressed his body through the narrow gap in the door, and indicated he wanted Sibelius. It was at this precise moment Zanzibar felt like a flower on a wall, a helpless rat glaring from the gutter, due to the swath of workers and guards passing in front of him, and the sound of tools mashing their voices. But through piercing wrinkled eyes, he clearly saw the exchange from Carter of a small vial of black liquid, and a thin piece of paper. When the deafening sound of the tools ceased, Zanzibar was met with another auspicious glare, and Carter slid out of view. The guards and workers downed tools, marched in unison out to a sojourn sunset, and Sibelius strode over to Zanzibar confidently. "Let's go meet the people." The landscape seemed so much different from the first visual intake just moments ago. Cell members were now scattered and not in unison, leaving an edgy taste to the proceedings. The crowd acknowledged Zanzibar's waves for silence, and took a deep intake of breath when Rothschild approached the podium. His usual confident repertoire was scuttled when he felt the crunch of deceased leaves beneath his loafers. Harking back to times best forgotten, and the vial of black remains weighing heavily in his breast pocket, Sibelius proceeded, "I won't keep you long, my fellow members. The sudden climate change has surprised us all. A minor fluctuation that is no doomed to repeat itself. Now, the remaining laws are due to be posted in the courtyard areas, and each of you standing before me have been delegated your assignments. This is a proud day for the High Court. An incomparable number of individuals have striven through the sweat and the angst to get to this point. The moment of dedication and a brighter tomorrow is upon us. Make me proud." Sibelius raised his arms swiftly, then gently brought them down. The flanking gesture exposed two lifeless doorways swing ajar, and several guards approached the cell members to sustain a line. The sun was now setting in the east, caressing an auburn orange across the dusky landscape. The numerous sights began to glow and hum from machinery powering up, and the first in a million turns of oily cogs. As the last cell member entered, and the wind banished the leaves into the forest, they were to never underpin the pain of the paradise they have left behind, and would never return. At that point Sibelius was developing the truth of what it takes for one man to achieve in a single lifetime. Chapter 6. The rest had dragged themselves from their pits, who wouldn't, upon the echoing shrill cry of an alarm throughout the High Court. At 3 in the morning, the cell inhabitants were still continuing their procedures, in what was once an emulsion-based fantasy, and would continue building guns for the next 5 or so hours. A swell of the utmost importance fleeted past the factory doors and noise-filled sites. Let me make this abundantly clear. The thermoregulators are at optimum efficiency and couldn't possibly be temperamental. Guards are posted at every sanctioned doorway on site. The climate change is unlikely to occur again so recently, and why are you looking at me like that? Carter inquisitively uttered Sibelius. Both of them, plus brusquely followed by Zanzibar in a dressing gown and bearing pale face, stared each other down. "I was on my way to tell you," shouted Carter over the siren. "Sinclair missed our scheduled appointment to evaluate the material delivery times, but no one's seen him since the speech." The guard strode past the troubled trio, and inserted a key into a green panel in the wall, at which point, the alarm faded. They approached Rothschild, saluted him, and he nodded in response for them to speak. "Mr. Rothschild, during our surveillance shift, we heard muttered cries from Mr. Sinclair's office and, well, it appears he's not alone. After walking past the office and hearing the noise, we checked to see if he was all right, but then he didn't open the door and we heard gunshots. That's when we sounded the alarm. Any other disturbances?" responded Rothschild. The guards shook their heads in unison and were quickly flanked by other patrol guards, clearly alerted by the commotion. "Here's what to do," said Zanzibar, in a strained voice. "3 of you, seal the entrances to all of the sites, and tell the officers who are surveying the cell inhabitants to be on full alert. Double-check that no cell members have slipped through the net. The 2 of you," at which point, Zanzibar pricked the attention of a new bunch of fledgling guards, "investigate if there are any gratifications, deliveries, and I want a full update on the climate conditions. Off you go," at which point, Zanzibar clapped his hands, and all the guards scuttled down the corridors and round through the doorways, like cats drawn to milk. "I'm impressed, my friends. In a dreamlike state you can still rally the troops." Sibelius shook Zanzibar's hand firmly, and gave an agreeable nod to Carter. He then proceeded with them both a few short paces to a stairwell, paced a few flight of steps, and turned another corner, upon which there stood a padded velvet door, with the word Imperial Chamber painted in gold. "Sibelius, I've been meaning to talk with you about the guns. Do you think it wise to issue these firearms? For the good of the High Court, for the good of the High Court, I'm more worried about Sinclair's condition." Sibelius pushed his entire body weight against the door, and it slowly creaked open, greeting them to a foul stench. "On my signal, enter quietly. Remember, Sinclair's office is just down the hall." Zanzibar gently covered the gold plating, rubbed his bare knuckles, and forced his way through the stench. As Zanzibar stepped through the eerie dimness of the chamber, Carter reached out to Sibelius and pulled his arm. "If anything should happen, take this," whispered Carter, and unsheathed a small dagger from his breast pocket. "I can't go in there, I'll stand guard." Sibelius stepped into the grim abyss, and sensed harrowing vulnerability, though dared not look back for Carter's fatigued face. "Sibelius, over here," whispered Zanzibar, following the sound of his voice. Creeping on silent foot, the alarm delivered its deafening tone once again. At the exact moment, lights above flickered, and Sibelius swung the blade upwards for defense. A rush of air flew past, the instantaneous moment at which Rothschild caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the blade. Before Zanzibar could react with his own weapon of choice, the moment of hostility dissipated and the door blew shut. A heightened gasp and yelp from Carter could barely be heard, but Sibelius hung on to it as best he could. After the initial recovery of a dangerous intrusion, Sibelius's subconscious worked overtime, and he swerved to Zanzibar and grabbed the front of his lapel. "Why didn't you do something? Who was it? Wait, what was it you wanted to tell me?" And Rothschild lowered his voice and the clothing-related grip. The headlamps continued to flicker, but amidst the obscurity Sibelius noticed Zanzibar's eyes rolled to the ground. He let go of the ruffled raincoat and crouched over the darkened corner, but within the flickering of artificial procured energy he saw it. There lay Sibelius's body, pale flesh and bony hands embedded with rigor mortis into the auburn carpet. A tip of a serrated blade barely protruded from his torn shirt. The blade had driven through his heart, causing his chest to convulse and the blood pools to ripple. "Sibelius, there's nothing we could have done. Whoever did this, they must have just slipped under the radar, but we'll follow the clues, check the system. Every form, word of mouth, we will find his killer." Rothschild didn't flinch, merely knelt before him and closed Sinclair's eyes. Sibelius was filled with emotions, some which emerged from the time of his father's death, and then he recalled the Imperial Chamber's sole occupant. From his private footage reels, Carter was usually the most active in the chamber. They all held ownership of places on site, and this was Carter. Unless weakling Carter strained under the pressure of civic duties, and force-fed Sinclair some workload. Selfish and pitiful, that could also explain why Carter didn't enter the room. "For all we know, he could be a traitor," muttered Sinclair, as he rose to his feet. The run-down and dirt-ridden Land Rover passed the border. Inside, Xavier Marcellus kept one hand on the wheel, and the other on a headset, which transmitted binary code from the High Court. The barren wasteland Xavier was passing through followed a long stretch of road, now 4.5 miles away from the High Court. It was on this outskirt of blackened earth they called late workers and premature inhabitants. I can't go back now. We're almost there." How are they handling the situation?" Xavier's dry voice broke the course, repetitive tire cycling, and the binary lowered in tone, and was replaced with the voice of a guard. It's pretty hectic down here, but don't worry. We found Mr. Rothschild and Mr. Zanzibar in the chamber. They're fine. No one knows who activated the alarm, but we've just been informed to triple-check cell inhabitants. Anyway, how are you doing? They keeping quiet or spooked by regression?" Xavier glanced off the road, to look back at 6 26-year-olds, 2 of which were women, both clinging closely to one another, their faces drenched in tears. The 4 men kept to themselves, but occasionally shared in a momentary glance through a pinhole into the rover, to glimpse the disparate view. Yay, the usual ragtag bunch. Listen, I want to keep them in the dark about what's going to happen now, so, no, I haven't seen them, I don't want them knowing about that. Who cares? Look, listen, I'll switch back in an hour. I want a full update, Clark, and I'd like to speak to Sibelius. Signing off. Over and out. Xavier placed the headset in a wrapper-laden compartment and switched off the aircon. 3, 2, 1. Xavier looked to the back of the rover, which succumbed to his prediction that all 6 were now slumped and unconscious. The sleep-inducing pill they were traditionally slipped during consumptive hours had the desired effect. Some may sleep eternal, but the ones who have the willpower have been known to drag their festooned bodies back to what they know. Xavier started to reduce speed, as the Land Rover finally approached its destination. In the distance were numerous dark tire tracks, which seemingly screeched to a halt, which Xavier dismissed every time he abandoned the bodies, like a rite of passage, and this was no exception. He slammed his foot on the brakes, and one of the 26-year-old scum fell out of their seat. Marsilius opened the door, but left the engine running, and turned up the radio. His dirty palm latched onto the handle at the back, as he heaved the bodies over his shoulder. Sometimes when there was a good climate report, Xavier would run the whole distance from High Court to No Man's Land. Keeping in good shape made him an invaluable member of the team. In general, everyone at the High Court liked him, even those who knew, one day, whether he was a crippled old foe, or they were expunged scum, he would come for them. Being side parole board official felt limited to his skills, which is why he chose the gratification side of work. It was the most important role, yet no one lined up because it ultimately brought death on the worst scale. You know, I've been good to you. I'm the best one for it. You wouldn't want Mr. Greaves or Zanzibar lifting you out that rover, they'd only disrespect you. Xavier lined up all 6 bodies along the stretch of dull sandy road. The sun left a glowing emphasis on the girls' tear-strewn faces. Xavier crouched down to each of them, and yanked off their ID tags and word count collars. The last one took a little force to rip it from his tree trunk of a neck. He stood up, took one last look at each of them, and retreated back to the rover. They still lay peacefully, without any coma-like fidgeting. And then the scenario played out in his mind, as Xavier Marsilius turned the key in the ignition, and reversed. The sun would burn them. The flies would swarm. He knew there were the third and final, the pneumatic thrills. A fabled myth of many crept in when the moon was fat. Xavier knew because they had a rapport. They took his offering. The thrills left how many they wanted, and if they were lucky, when the climate change would come. Of course Rothschild knew this arrangement, but if he weren't such a Howard Hawks circa clean freak he would want to personally instigate his own ground rules. But Xavier's life was on the line, not his, and as the Land Rover picked up speed, he was already at the halfway point. Gibbons, Smith, Delway, Hicks, Saint and Barnaby all still lay there. He knew it. Xavier retrieved the headset beneath the swath of wrappers and lowered the radio. This is Marsilius, returning from gratification 0497, group of 5 and expecting response, requesting update on the High Court situation. A screeching level of static passed through his eardrums, and the binary code then broke in, which gave him the encouragement to continue driving. At this point, the sky overhead peaked in ecstasy, with glistening beams of light etching through a small huddle of clouds. Patrol Site B Guard 22 responding. Can you read me? Over, ? Affirmative, replied Marsilius, as the speck of the High Court emerged in the distance. Not a very degree of change at the moment, sir. 5 cell members overpowered some of the guards, and remain fugitives on site. Mr. Rothschild and Zanzibar were apparently trapped in the Imperial Chamber, but Patrol Guard 20 passed by and let them. Yes, thank you, sir. We've just received word that Carter is missing, but we have everyone searching and, yes, okay, I'll tell him. And Sinclair is dead, sir. Someone stabbed him, the same person who locked Sibelius in the chamber apparently. We could do with your help down here. I'll keep you posted. But, sir, his head filled with the sound of a triggered firearm, and Xavier's hands jolted on the steering wheel. If you don't bring back the 6 cell members, then I, Parson Aznavov, will kill this patrol guard standing right before me. Chapter 7. What on earth are you talking about? You already told me what happened to them. Wait a minute, who is this? Clark, is this some kind of joke? No, I shall speak. My name's Parsonen. Here are my demands. What do you get when Clark's being strangled for information? A guard lies on the floor with a bullet in his head, and this Sinclair fellow's bleeding to death. Answer, get back those goddamn cell members. And you already told me that. Look, if you're one of the cell members, I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement. I don't want your promises, Xavier, and I'm not a cell member. Just go back, collect all 6 of them, and be back at the High Court by nightfall. Leave them in the depository yard on Site G. If you're not back in time, or you try something stupid, then many more will die. Over and out. The snap of the guard's neck was clearly audible, and then silence. Xavier turned off the engine and sat, questioning what to do. With the level of security at the High Court, it's likely there is only one of him. Sibelius's reaction to this news would not be a happy one. If it were up to him, the best option would be to continue forward. He wouldn't tolerate their demands, and no cell member has ever gained entry and continued work. Xavier turned the key in the ignition, and sped onwards to the High Court. The corner was icy cold where Leeson and her fellow cell inhabitants were crouching. The extractor fan blew shockwaves of ice onto their exposed pale flesh. To escape, Leeson and her 2 inhabitants, whom weren't given names at birth, and therefore dubbed 2011 and 1878, were departing to Site A to rejuvenate and clean when the alarm sounded. In the ensuing hysteria, other cell members who were passing put their hands to their ears, while others started their eyes with a look of bewilderment. Luminous lights flickered incessantly in the courtyard, and suddenly up to 30 guards rallied together, emerging from Site A with batons, and hastily calling together worried members. Leeson took her chance, despite the consequences of not possessing a one-track mind and doing as she was told. She turned and ran back into Site E, but could hear the guards pressing on her position, with high commands. Leeson used her quick wits and ran through to the showers, which were filled with steam, and may help her lose her pursuers. Over here, called an ominous quiet voice. She cast her wild, yet vacant eyes ominously amidst the heat, and peeked in the corner 2 pale people climbing into a ventilation shaft. Leeson felt hesitant since they looked sincerely unfamiliar, despite wearing cell regulation uniforms. The guards closing in were shouting commands, so Leeson took a chance and approached the unsavory twosome. One, a short brunette girl with freckles, reached out a hand, while the other, a tall, slim gentleman, hewed her rear through the grate. He fumbled with the cover, and quickly pushed it into place as the guards came into view. "We've lost her, Johnson, and I think there may have been others with her. Yes, we'll seal down the area, and rally the other cell members back to the cell zone." Amidst the guards' response unit berating orders, and checking the corridors, Leeson looked in the dark passage at her 2 cohorts, who, just as she prepared to speak, the girl grabbed her throat and started to pull rapidly. Leeson panicked and desperately attempted pulling away in the cramped conditions. The man reached down towards her feet, and, fearing the worst, she kicked ferociously. Just when the horror was creeping in, and fearing she had made a terrible mistake, the discomfort loosened from her throat. "Sorry if we frightened you," said the young girl. The gentleman hushed her, and leaned over to Leeson to see if the guards had dispersed. "They're gone now. We were removing your tags, just in case they follow you. Applying the right force from a third party always does the trick." "Who are you?" questioned Leeson. "I mean, thank you, but you're not cell members." The girl adjusted her body and discarded the tags. I apologize. You don't know cruel their people can be, and they call us scum. I haven't slept in days, and they show us videos of war. Apparently the pneumatic thrills really do exist. Hold on, slow down a moment. Why didn't you attempt escaping the site altogether, getting as far away as possible from this accursed place? I'm getting to that. We've been intercepting all their meetings, confined to these ventilation shafts. Only yesterday we were discovered by 2 armed guards. Rothschild's minions have been put through their paces. Now it seems they barely sleep. And I overhead. The old man Lazarus interrupted the slim gentleman. Yes, that multiple assignments are forming. The guards don't merely leer at the susceptible, nor do many of the cell inhabitants expire and face death. He's building an army. Train others like he trained me. That's a list. And the Bible. Suddenly an ear-piercing noise filled the cavernous space, and the walls vibrated. 2011 started shuffling through the space, and despite her reservations, Leeson followed. Their clothes began to burn against the metal. As they quickened their pace, the trio turned a corner, and faced a deep, resonating length of tunnel, and a speck of light, with a sweet scent lingering. The walls are closing in. Quickly this way, shouted the gentleman. Indeed, the silver walls shivered and shirked, and all 3 of them were finding it difficult to move. At a race against time, Leeson used every moral fiber to push the girl forth, her heart slipping and her head being pushed to the floor. The gentleman managed to free himself. His face was barely visible outside, against the shrinking light. The heat was affecting Leeson's mental state, as she became sweaty and drowsy. Her whole body rested squarely upon the burning metal, and with a last ounce of strength, Leeson pulled herself free, with help from the girl, and closely felt the air pushed out as the ventilation shaft closed. For a few minutes, time seemed to remain still. All 3 lay on a foreign, yet cool floor, recovering their breath from the trauma of the sudden escapade. I should have seen that coming, muttered the gentleman, massaging the burns on his elbows. On the day of my gratification, a member of the High Council arrived personally with a letter. It seemed strange at the time. Usually they dispatch a transporter, at least before they amended the Exodus law. Apparently one of the unannounced rules has changed. Wait, I thought you were renegades throughout the site. How did you know about the law refinement? Well, when we were found out and captured the first time, chimed the girl, they locked us into this detention center, padded walls and stale air. No sound, but when I peeked through the glass, one of those high court men strode in, and unfurled this big scroll. The other guards gathered around, and pretty soon one of the guards became angry, waving his arms and pushing the member around. That's enough proof. The security know their place, just like the cell members of old, and whatever they were discussing, didn't regard any run-of-the-mill rule-breaking. Leeson and the girl gathered their thoughts and began to take notice of their foreign surroundings. A cool breeze whisked past the occupants, emanating from a grate on the ceiling cultivated in a shaft of midday sun. Basking in the light were 2 large green boxes, closely surrounded by some scattered documents and large folders. You seem to know so much. Then, where have you taken me? 1878 stared blankly at Leeson, implying that she knew nothing of this place, and proceeded to the table of documents. The Bible only guarantees access into heaven if we obey the commandments, all 10 of them. 1878 looked up from the table at 2011, who was studying the cases. From behind closed doors, the pecuniary scandals from closed grates, I know someone like Rothschild will never achieve this path of enlightenment. 1878 quickly darted around and grabbed a stunned Leeson by the arms. If they find me, we are dead. No army, no banishment, just plain, cold, in the ground, understand? Leeson pulled back slightly, but reluctantly nodded from her steely glare. Good, so Rothschild's going to do everything in his power to be deemed a good man, the eye of the beholder, like the founders who followed. He's building an army, and through advanced cloning techniques, when you shower, eat, every movement, it's so easy. There could be one of you, me, will live on, but the soul and the mind will be molded to that of a corrupt bystander. So, I need you help someone that's pulling me in. I can't. Someone's coming, screamed 2011. The gentleman was somehow magnetized to one of the green cases, and his face appeared to be embedded into the green case, whilst the other glued. What did you do? Help us, please. And the two girls fled to 2011 and were studying the box, at the same time prizing him off the green cases. They will help you. Bite the core, release the venom. This ominous voice echoed around the small room, and with it invited nature. A multitude of dark leaves plummeted through the grate and blocked away the day. Leeson attempted to remain calm, but the gentleman simply couldn't be freed, and a tumult of leaves continued to fill the room. We've got to get out of here, screamed Leeson. No, I can't leave him behind. Without me they'll corrupt him. But that voice, and he's stuck. How did he get like that? The girl trudged through the dark, moist leaves which now reached her waist over to the wet desk. She plowed through the mulch, barely phased, and pulled out 2 large sheets of blue paper. If you must go, take these, they'll help. Remember what I told you. If you see Parson Aznavour, he knows who you are, and believe me, you won't forget the face of your executioner. So run like hell. Run, screamed 1878. Leeson heaved her feeble frame through the waist-high leaves, still desperately coming to terms with this whole vendetta. Who are these people? Who can I trust? What's fact? And how will I be rescued? Leeson felt in her gut she would never see them both again. The real two. Leeson stuffed the blueprints down her trousers, pushing through the leaves with the help of the door. The door slowly opened as she compressed her body through the narrow gap. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, were the whispered, lingering words Leeson heard after exiting her trauma. She quietly turned in the direction of the sound, and noticed a dark-haired man praying, his head lowered, hands drenched in blood, and the name badge Carter, resting between a pistol and a prayer book. Chapter 8. Sibelius was fervently striding about the space of his office, and took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. A rapid knock echoed from the polished door. The doors open. Zanzibar strode into the room, flanked by 3 guards with shotguns. How could this have happened, Zanzibar? Why haven't I got word back on Carter's position? So many questions that need answering, and for some time standards have been slipping. Changes must be set in motion. You agree, don't you? I mean, I trust you wholeheartedly, Zanzibar, as one of my father's confidants. But surely the council and you can identify with our lack in progress. I know you're agitated, but at this moment a good show of conduct would be to see you active. The room where the green cases are, there's been a disturbance. On the fleeting prior words, Sibelius strode from the office, not before taking a glance at the faded photograph, and proceeded with Zanzibar to a flight of stairs. What sort of disturbance? Commanded Rothschild. The guards are down there checking, can't seem to enter. Don't worry, the guards are all notified to stay clear of the area. The regular happenings that work everyone's blood, flickering lights, changes in temperature, strange noises. Have all the cell members been detained yet? No, sir. The one called Leeson managed to evade the guards, and possibly 2 others. They removed their tracking devices before we could zone in on their position, but we've got everyone working on it. The disgruntled group of confidants turned the corner of the stairwell and proceeded outside amongst nature to Site B. The conditions look promising today, said Sibelius. You guard, commanded Sibelius. The High Council have arranged a meeting tomorrow to discuss further site developments. Take this, call the number on the back and read out the information. Understand? The guard gave a wavering, yet malign nod of the head and scuttled away, accompanied by the crunching of leaves. Zanzibar glanced over at Sibelius, before averting to a fervent stare forward. I know what you're thinking, and I can handle it. Do unto others, as you would have them do unto you. The Bible states, the green cases are fine. I know it. Remember, we discussed it. The compound will be ready for carving tomorrow. To chip away at its beauty. By the way, and word from Marsilius yet? The rough terrain seemed to decay under a burning sun, baking alive the open desert before it sheltered behind the morning mountains. Xavier frustratingly switched off the ignition, yet calmly pulled open the car door and looked around to see no personnel operating the main gates. A bead of perspiration trickled down his brow as multitudes of uncertainty swept over his body. Conflicted with ranges of emotion, he called out to the Baron outpost, "They're not with me, and I take the guard was already dead before I arrived, so you're fighting a losing." "Hello, is someone there?" called an ominous voice. He scanned the perimeter and heard shuffling. "Is that you, Mr. Xavier? I could do with some help, sir. You see I'm wait. Why can't I see you?" "Who is this?" said Marsilius. "Fear some kind of trap." "Patrol Guard 22, sir. I'm tied down here." But the strange man became anxious and, "I don't know where he is." By this point Xavier let go of his moist grip on the car wing mirror and made small steps, sensing an unwavering hostility. "I heard a gunshot over the radio. Is everything?" "Yes, thank goodness it's you. It was only a flesh wound, but Jameson fainted when the guy put the gun to his head. Look, he's gone. Can you help us, please?" Marsilius still remained predominantly edgy, and turned back to the Land Rover for a difficult attempt at intercepting another signal from the radio. "I'm going to attempt response with another site. It may take some time, but with some luck a large whoosh of air blew past Xavier, and the surge of pain caused him to dive below the body of the car, and then the hot blood drips next to the flat tire. "I tried sparing you, convincing you that a safeguard was heeding a prayer, but you left me no choice. This time I won't miss." "Wait!" shouted Xavier, as he rose from his stupor, for a view of the vigilante. Bedraggled locks curled around a pale, gaunt face, slightly covering a deep, red scar, and dressed in gray militia patterns. The man perplexed Xavier with an insincere smirk, and used the barrel of the pistol to push open the toll booth door. At the gate, and at his feet, was Clark, his brains splattered across the floor. "I've learned so much from this place. You didn't think I'd just up and walk away, did you? Hands up, move towards me, both of you." With lightning reflexes, Parson pierced the glass with a bullet, hitting the radio with a crackling fizz. He quickly pulled the incapacitated guard across the ground for cover. "I do so hate shootouts." A fixated glimmer of sunlight reflected into the eyes of Marsilius, his view firmly on the pistol. The captured guard stooped and etched away at the everlasting silence with a naive whimper. "I should kill this scum, and nothing will get in my way of eradicating many more of his kind. I specifically ordered the return of those 6 cell members." "Do you know what Sibelius will do when he discovers the body?" "The High Council submit annual checks, so you don't stand a chance disrupting Xavier's keen interest in negotiation." Parson threw the guard aback, making contact with the glass window in the toll booth, knocking him out cold. Marsilius took this opportunity of malice to swipe for the pistol. Unfortunately, the quick-witted guard turned in time and thrust Xavier to the ground with a crunch echoing into the heavens, bringing the rain hurtling, and the sun fading. This tawdry effort of control between the underhanded tyrants resulted in deadlock, and a fleet of high-court limousines were making their way in the distance. To restore order, the place we knew as the Quadrant, and others including a 21-year-old cell member considered a harbinger of mysticism, and a far-flung mirage was out protected by heavy steel. Leeson felt time grind down, her mind still in a spin, her vision only amplifying to another door, 20 paces away, blocked by the holier-than-thou praying man. Her mental block pushing through the restraints of her mind, Leeson shuffled her bare, dirty feet in motion, attempting not to disturb Carter from his trance. "They will throw me in the pit. Please bring him back. I've done nothing wrong." These were the barely audible scribes uttered from Carter, the blood on his palms dripping onto the white floor. Leeson now crept along the corridor in a stretch of quietness, currently halfway between the 2 opposing entrances. The young girl was right, Leeson pondered. To dawdle would be a foolish error, and possessing the blueprints gave her the upper hand. She froze suddenly upon hearing the shuffling of feet upon the opposing side of the new door. Pressing her ear to the door, a distinct sound of grinding metal became apparent. Leeson panicked and swerved back towards Carter, who by this time was aroused by her agile movements. Rubbing his eyes free of blood and tears, she darted frantically to the floor, scooped up the pistol and shot out the headlight. Her knowledge of guns was minimal. She vaguely remembers its shape as a child, several years before being brought to the cell zone from the barren land. Its sound echoes, that of which punctured her parents' fragile bodies, her sole witness to the carnage wrought upon her family. Death is another part of life, but I will not silence the sound of man, she thought. Her glimpse of compulsion may have been witnessed, were it not for Carter's blindness of blood and bereavement. Leeson felt the presence of others enter the space, and the door gave a low creak. Who was that called out Carter? Guards, I think it's an escaped prisoner, do not let her escape. Leeson kept her back to the wall, feeling awkward and fearful in this strange place. Mr. Carter, are you all right? We've been looking for you everywhere. Yes, I'm fine. The bullet shot the light, you clown, that's all. Look, go get a flashlight, and then one of you block the door in case she escapes. Yes sir, quietly responded the guard, followed by the faint sound of footsteps against the hard floor. Not that it's my place to say sir, whispered the remaining guard. Shouldn't we get Sibelius? This is his private quarters if I'm not mistaken, or switch the alarm on for backup. No, interrupted Carter. The High Court members will be here soon. We can't have any more pandemonium. I don't want to put myself at risk if one of those stupid cell members holds these sacred items. Leeson felt insecure knowing there was no way out, and shooting her way out from a dimly lit room wouldn't exactly be in her favor. I escaped the cells. Now what are you going to do with me? Screamed Leeson, in a build-up of terror, and fired 2 shots in the direction of the door. It felt like possession for a moment, whether it was nervous energy, writhing in the pit of her stomach, or something else. She charged at the guard, feeling certain one of her bullets made contact, swinging out with her fists, making swift contact with Carter's chin. This is an outrage. Kill this insolent troublemaker, yelled Carter. The sharpened edges of the blueprints tore multiple cuts across her fast-moving thighs, giving haste to her pursuit. She ran down a brightly lit corridor and spotted various doors and room numbers, including testament, cargo and munitions. Her breath grew short, hearing clambering footsteps overlapping her own in great spirit. I'll have to lose them and check the blueprints fast, panted Leeson in rushed breaths. Stop, you scum, shouted one of the guards, at which point her rapidity in turning corners only increased the size of the surroundings. A balcony to the left overlooking the sights encapsulated a pinprick visage of the cell zone, and before moving on, her eyes darted below the balcony, noticing several limousines resting in a shaded alley, and a fight ensuing with men of different rank and posterity. A cold grip clasped her wrist, and Leeson turned and faced a guard shining a flashlight in her face. The searing light didn't quell her backhanded comments, however. End of the road, little lady. I thought you guys weren't supposed to talk, said Leeson, pulling away. No law can silence me, especially when I turn you in as reward. She pulled free her right hand and slapped him across the face. You shouldn't have done that. The guard forced a tighter hold on her wrist, and seeing the gun in her pocket, lunged with his other free hand for the pistol. A tussle for the weapon ensued, yet hearing an echoing click disparaged Leeson of all her options, and the guard grabbed her by the neck and forced her to the floor. Everyone, close all the windows and openings. Severe rain clouds are forming. All site workers and patrol guards report to Site C and the sleeping quarters for High Court inspection. Anyone with a code ending 1 or 5 report to Sibelius immediately. The words from a newly installed intercom fell on deaf ears for Leeson, who suddenly felt tiresome, the escape from the cell zone feeling days away. Just as she felt the guard pressing his hand on her throat, a piercing cry filled her ears. She's on level 6. Help me. The skylight isn't closed and the wailing continued. Through narrowing vision on the cold steel floor, Leeson saw blurred images of something sparkling, then rolled over after being distracted by a low thud, possibly the gun falling from the balcony. Then her eyes cleared and the reason for the screaming became apparent. The guard lay motionless on the floor and smoke emanated from his shirt and cuffs. Proceeding with her fashionable trend of energy and determination, the mind and body joined as one and she pulled herself up off the floor. Now heavy footsteps from all sides were closing in, and Leeson took one last look at the scarred patrol guard, and swiftly flew into the room behind her, barricading the door shut. The door read, Site A, Room 19, Warning, Souls Awaiting Vengeance. Chapter 9. Welcome everyone. We'll skip the flattering introductions and get right to the point. This emergency meeting has been called to address the shocking guard inexperience and lack of communication to our head of operations, Sibelius. I am aware of several major incidents today, and we all regrettably feel the loss of our close working confidant, Sinclair Michelin. His services will be greatly missed. However, myself and the other elite members of the High Court are gravely concerned with so many errors in such a short space of time. I'm certain we've only scratched the surface, since our last phone debrief was only 2 weeks ago. Explain. In total, 11 tall, powerful men were kings in undisclosed site location, known as the Archives. The walls glowed in a prism of green, cascading beams of light from the ceiling onto the meeting table. I admit, began Sibelius, the level of determination and sustainability has been somewhat overwhelming. The natural instinct of taking this on myself came into play. I usurped an insurmountable number of duties, so clearly a compassion of self-reliance have in turn brought failure. This is not a submission of claims and law petitions, interrupted one of the 11. Rothschild, you were well aware of the responsibilities in turn of controlling and managing a cell zone. The edgy member of the group heaved a briefcase onto the table, moonlight glinting of the gold clasps from the window. These are just some of the inexorable climate readings that Mr. Greaves was a part, that could so easily have cost him his life. What do you have to say for yourself? Sibelius narrowed his eyes, glancing from the report to the grim face of the 12 solitary men stood before him. I thank you all, as I have done many times. My father's actions certainly were an astonishment to me, and I will not be doomed to repeat his course of failure. Myself and Zanzibar have gathered some readings on climate control, cell inhabitants, building maintenance, employees and provisions, and we are both genuinely satisfied with everything. I knew this would be my greatest task, and the faith you have bestowed in me is unprecedented. If I have anything to regret or feel sorry for, it's for stepping into the light, while keeping my eyes on the shadows. Zanzibar distributed the reports, followed by the sound of squirming on seats, some of the gentlemen putting on glasses. Carter put out a much-needed cigarette, the wisps of smoke dancing in the moonlight. Enough with this riddle talk, and phony reports, and suspend him. Drexler, you have the casting vote, so put an end to this disgraceful incompetence. This isn't a war of words, you degenerate, called out Zanzibar. Sibelius is one of the most aptly skilled council members I have had the fortune of working with. While his mistakes are few, his successes are many. This man works round the clock, for the good of the council, and if you can't see the level of dedication from these reports, then you're less competent than I give you credit for. Gentlemen, if we could have order please. A momentary provided everyone with some food for thought. The report is impressive, and what Zanzibar says, I mostly agree with. Drexler stood up, pressing the tips of his fingers together. But the lack of communication and awareness between you and the council cannot be so easily dismissed. Drexler towered over Sibelius while he lay dormant in his chair, over the presence of his predecessor. I understand, was all Sibelius could muster. Emerging from the shadows, a cell operator strode towards Drexler and passed a note, which seemed complicit yet small, leaving a subtle hint to its evasive importance. What is to become of Michelin? Mr. Rothschild exclaimed a council member to the left of Sibelius. The other members rolled their eyes to Sibelius, Drexler still confined to his private punishment. Zanzibar contacted his family, and a transporter along with several guards have been dispatched to take the body home. With any luck, the rest of our personnel can rest easy with their families. Your thought process is irrational, Sibelius, and the tongue with which you speak is wagging too preeminently. This note outlines that moments ago, a cell guard was found mutilated. From an immediate report of Zanzibar appeared inclined to interrupt, but Sibelius nudged his chair and withdrew the proposed impediment. As the other 10 grew weary with the meeting's continual disorder, some guards and onlookers left to allow some cohesiveness. I am aware from my informant that the entire area was put on lockdown and alerted to the usual protocol and amendments from the Exodus law. My sources also indicate that this would never occurred were it not for a bad little cell member who wriggled through the net and locked herself away. More blood on your hands. There are some details which are insecure in this room to discuss and for others to hear. May I close by saying, called out Sibelius to the onlookers, that effects which scar our elite patrol, such as the climate crisis, can bring benefits with their unpredictable downfall, allowing researchers here to gain an understanding, constant improvements, and it will show throughout, and it will be in success of these conflicts, that we will further improve on our own human testing. Thank you, Sibelius. Let's wrap this up then, shall we? All of you, my colleagues, have made your voices heard, and it's unanimously clear that you consider my decision of instigating Sibelius into the High Council premature. Your father's somewhat erratic values and bespoken traits were the results of his dismissal, and although your path in life is of greater determination and success, the ever-amounting failures must be dealt with. The entire site locale and all cell zones will be detained to a mandatory lockdown until further notice. The currently appointed guards of all positions must remain on the premises, and all the researchers are required to carry on as normal. This will be put into effect in 2 days, and 3 of our colleagues, Harrison, Bramanoff and Jones, will take over your duties. The only lines of communication will be via telephone, in your office, Sibelius. The scheme will last for a minimum of 1 month, until I deem otherwise, or unless there is a notable improvement in the running of the facility.